if it is indeed a tunnel. There's a top, there's a bottom, there are sidewalls.
Ridiculously easy.
Oh, really?
We are not oscillating. That casing is just going
dropping.
in.
It's just dropping.
Yes.
The wind howled across Oak Island as the first rays of dawn broke through the thick Atlantic fog. For more than 2 centuries, this tiny island has guarded a mystery that has swallowed fortunes, destroyed lives, and left generation after generation with nothing but unanswered questions. But this time, something was different. Deep beneath layers of rock and centuries of silence, the team had uncovered something no map had ever revealed, a hidden passage buried deep within the legendary Money Pit. The air inside was cold, heavy, and completely untouched. Every step echoed through the darkness. Every second seemed to bring them closer to an answer they had been chasing for centuries. Then their lights caught something. A faint, golden shimmer appeared along the tunnel wall. The crew froze. Was this finally the legendary treasure that so many had risked everything to find? Or had Oak Island just revealed something far more dangerous? What happened next would become one of the most astonishing moments in the history of the Oak Island mystery, and could change everything the team thought they knew about the legendary treasure zone. But before we uncover what they found beneath Oak Island, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what comes next, because this time, the mystery may be closer to being solved than ever before. To understand why an empty space measuring just 1.5 feet could bring an entire drilling operation to a halt, you first have to understand exactly where the team is working. For more than 200 years, the Money Pit has stood at the center of the Oak Island mystery. It has consumed enormous amounts of money, equipment, and effort, and in some cases, lives, while revealing almost nothing in return. Countless treasure hunters have come to this same stretch of ground, convinced they were finally going to solve the mystery, only to walk away with more questions than answers. But the modern team has taken a completely different approach. Instead of relying solely on excavation and heavy machinery, they have turned to science. Core drilling, water sampling, geological analysis, and laboratory testing are being used to understand what lies beneath the island before committing to another major excavation. And on this particular morning, all eyes are focused on one borehole, DN 11.5. Located directly inside what the team calls the treasure zone, the borehole sits in a section of the Money Pit area between roughly 80 and 120 feet underground. This is a critical depth because previous testing has produced some of the strongest indications of gold in the island's groundwater, while geological surveys have also identified multiple voids and unusual underground spaces. The objective seems simple: drill down to 100 feet, recover the core, and let the material tell the story. At the site, Charles Barkhouse and geologist Terry Matson watch closely as Mike operates the drill. Every section of pipe disappearing beneath the surface could provide another piece of the puzzle. The drill has already passed through the upper layers, moving from around 78 feet toward 88 feet. Then something changes. At approximately 90 feet below the surface, the resistance suddenly disappears. The drill drops. Mike immediately feels the difference. Instead of pushing against solid material, the bit has apparently broken through into open space. The machine is stopped. Measurements are taken, and the result is startling. There is a void roughly 1.5 feet high, approximately 90 feet beneath the surface. On an ordinary geological site, an underground gap like this might simply be an interesting natural formation. But Oak Island is anything but ordinary. Here, An unexplained void inside the money pit area immediately raises another possibility: an abandoned tunnel or shaft whose original wooden supports may have disappeared centuries ago, leaving an empty space behind. The discovery is significant enough that Mike pauses the drilling operation, and word is sent out to Rick and Marty Lagina. When the brothers arrive at the drilling site, they quickly learn that DN 11.5 may not be an isolated anomaly. Two nearby boreholes, DN 12.5 and DN 13.5, have encountered a solid structure at approximately 94 feet below ground. Even more intriguing, all three boreholes appear to fall along the same east-west line. Charles and Terry examine the alignment, and when they trace it across the area, the line points directly toward the garden shaft. That changes the significance of the discovery. The garden shaft is considered by the team to be potentially different from many of the heavily disturbed areas of the money pit. If it really is an original structure created before centuries of treasure hunting activity, it could offer something extremely valuable: relatively undisturbed evidence of whatever happened beneath the island. Much of the money pit has been excavated, collapsed, flooded, drilled, and excavated again over generations. As a result, reconstructing its original underground layout is incredibly difficult, but an older shaft that escaped much of that disturbance could preserve clues in their original positions, and if a tunnel actually connects to or runs toward that shaft, it could provide an entirely new understanding of the island's underground system. This is why the three boreholes matter so much. If DN 11.5 encountered open space at 90 feet, while DN 12.5 and DN 13.5 encountered a structure around 94 feet, the team has to consider whether they are looking at different parts of the same underground feature. Terry Matson sees a possible explanation. The higher void could represent the upper portion of a tunnel, while the solid material encountered in the neighboring holes could be part of the structure surrounding it. If that's true, then the empty space beneath DN 11.5 may not be a random geological formation at all. It could be the first indication that the drill has reached an underground passage. But there is a crucial problem. A theory is still only a theory until the physical evidence supports it. The drill may have entered a tunnel, it may have encountered a natural cavity, or it may have broken into something completely unexpected. There is only one way to find out: bring the core back to the surface. For Terry, that core could be the difference between another intriguing Oak Island theory and the first tangible evidence of a hidden structure beneath the treasure zone. The question now is simple: what exactly is waiting inside that empty space 90 feet below the island? The decision is immediate: bring the core up. After years of drilling into Oak Island, the crew has learned that every time a drill suddenly breaks into empty space, the same possibility enters everyone's mind. Could this finally be the opening that leads to the treasure? Most of those moments have ended in disappointment. But this void is different. It sits close to the garden shaft, potentially near its base, and its position makes it one of the most intriguing discoveries the team has encountered. Mike lowers the drill again. This time, the equipment comes back carrying something substantial. The recovered core is heavy and intact. The team places it on the table and carefully records the measurements. The drilling run reaches approximately 98.5 feet. The empty section begins around 90 feet and continues until roughly 97 feet, meaning the recovered sample extends through the entire suspected cavity and into the material forming its lower boundary. Then the crew notices something that changes the mood completely. There is wood inside the core, not a tiny fragment, not an isolated splinter. Wood appears throughout the sample, including a substantial piece embedded near the center. Think about what that means. Wood has been recovered from roughly 90 feet underground, inside a suspected void that appears to align with the garden shaft and sits in the same general area where two neighboring boreholes encountered a structure. For the team, this is no longer just an empty space on a drilling log. It could be evidence of human construction. Terry carefully removes a small section of the wood for laboratory testing. The objective is specific: determine whether the material contains any unusual elements, particularly metals, that would be difficult to explain through ordinary geological processes. The sample is sent for analysis. Later that same day, inside the Oak Island Interpretive Center, the team gathers around the results. Rick Lagina and Craig Tester sit down with archaeologist Laird Niven and archaeometallurgist Emma Culligan as they prepare to examine what could become one of the most important findings of the operation. The preliminary evidence from DN 11.5 is already intriguing. The underground feature appears consistent with a tunnel. Its alignment seems to point toward the garden shaft, and most importantly, it lies within the very section of the money pit that the team has repeatedly identified as a potential treasure target. Now there is another question. What exactly is inside the wood? Over the previous day, the sample had been dried and examined by Emma using an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, commonly known as an XRF. The technology works by directing X-rays at the material and measuring the energy released in response. That allows scientists to identify the elements present in the sample, including metals that may be present within the material itself. Emma begins explaining the results. At first, everything looks ordinary. The sample contains small amounts of iron, manganese, titanium, calcium, potassium, aluminum, and other elements commonly found in the soil and bedrock around Oak Island. Nothing surprising there. Then Emma reaches the result that makes everyone pay attention. Gold. The wood is showing a gold signal. Emma is cautious. The detected amount is small, and she makes it clear that she repeated the analysis before accepting the result. But the significance isn't necessarily the quantity. It's the fact that gold appears in a piece of buried wood associated with the suspected underground structure. The other elements can easily be explained by the natural chemistry of Oak Island. Gold is much harder to dismiss. Emma identifies the result as a major outlier compared with the ordinary background readings. And suddenly the team has something they rarely get on Oak Island: two separate lines of evidence pointing in the same direction. Gold had already been detected in water samples collected from the area. Now gold has appeared in wood recovered from a suspected tunnel roughly 90 feet underground. Different material, different testing process, same general zone. The team is careful not to call it treasure. A trace amount of gold does not prove that a treasure deposit is sitting beneath the island. But when the result is considered alongside the previous water testing, the possibility of a meaningful pattern becomes much harder to ignore. Rick and Craig discuss what the discovery actually tells them. The evidence does not reveal exactly what is underground, but it could indicate that the team is finally moving in the right direction. For Rick, the wood result could become one of the defining discoveries of the season, a physical companion to the gold signals that have been appearing in the water for years. The entire purpose of those earlier tests was to identify a direction, a place where the team could stop guessing and start digging with a much stronger reason to believe something important might be waiting below. And now the instruments appear to be pointing toward the same target. But the story doesn't end there. The following morning, another piece of evidence enters the investigation. The team turns its attention to a metal fragment recovered from a completely different borehole, D2. The obvious question is whether that piece has been tested. It has, and the result immediately raises the stakes. Rick Lagina, Marty Lagina, Craig Tester, and the rest of the team have been conducting a carefully planned drilling campaign throughout the money pit, trying to break through a mystery that has survived for more than 2 centuries. Now the XRF testing has produced 2 separate gold-related results, and the metal recovered from D2 may be the most dramatic result yet. The analysis reports a gold concentration of approximately 700 parts per million. That number is enough to make everyone in the room sit up and take notice. Because for the Oak Island team, the question is no longer simply whether gold exists somewhere beneath the island. The question is becoming much more specific. Why are multiple pieces of evidence from different locations and different materials continuing to point toward gold in the same underground system? The trail actually began about a week earlier. That was when the team recovered a piece of wood from approximately 88 feet underground inside borehole D2. The sample was later carbon dated, producing an age that could reach back as far as 1488. But the wood wasn't the only thing recovered from that same underground context. The team also brought up an unusual piece of metal. Geoscientist Dr. Ian Spooner examined the fragment using X-ray fluorescence, or XRF, to determine which elements were present. Then, the results appeared. One symbol immediately caught everyone's attention, a U, the chemical symbol for gold. Gary Drayton was the first to point it out. But detecting gold was only the beginning. The real question was what that gold actually meant. Spooner presented 2 possible explanations. The first was relatively simple. The metal could have come into contact with gold at some point during its long burial history, leaving traces behind on its surface. The second possibility was much more significant. The gold could actually be incorporated into the metal itself, chemically bonded within its composition. If that second explanation proved correct, the fragment wouldn't simply be an ordinary piece of iron carrying traces of gold. The object itself could potentially have considerable value. Spooner remained cautious about the quantity. The amount detected was relatively small, far closer to a thimbleful than anything resembling a massive deposit. But that wasn't what had the team excited. The important part was that gold was present at all, and it had appeared roughly 90 feet underground in an area where the team was already finding worked wood and indications of underground structures. Rick Lagina saw the bigger picture. The gold-bearing metal and the wood sample weren't isolated discoveries. They came from approximately the same depth, from the same drilling operation, and from the same broader area where previous water testing had already produced elevated readings for silver and gold. Marty Lagina, however, kept the team's expectations grounded. A trace amount of gold associated with an iron fragment doesn't automatically mean a treasure vault is sitting below them. Oak Island has produced plenty of promising clues that ultimately led nowhere. But even with that history in mind, 2 separate gold detections appearing in different materials from the same general zone were becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. And that brings the investigation to the C1 cluster. This area has rapidly become one of the team's most closely watched targets. Water samples collected from existing boreholes in the region have produced unusually high readings for both silver and gold. Because of that, the team has established a strategic drilling grid across the area. The goal is different from the treasure hunts of the past. Instead of randomly digging and hoping to get lucky, they are attempting to use the accumulated evidence to determine exactly where the next hole should go. If the gold really is part of the metal itself, and if geological evidence cannot provide a natural explanation, the team believes the drilling grid could be moving them closer to the source. Their next target is B4. The borehole is positioned only about 14 feet from D2 along the northern boundary of the C1 cluster. That location is anything but accidental. The team has already identified evidence of a possible tunnel at approximately 90 feet in this general area, making that recurring depth particularly important. Terry explains the strategy, and it gives the team two possible ways to succeed. The best-case scenario is obvious. B4 could hit the treasure itself, but there is another possibility. Even if the borehole misses the vault, it could intersect one of the underground passages believed to run through the C1 cluster at roughly the same 90-foot depth. A tunnel wouldn't necessarily be the treasure, but it could provide something almost as valuable, a physical route leading toward it. Either way, B4 has the potential to give the team a new direction, and the anticipation is becoming almost impossible to hide. One of the Lagina brothers compares the feeling to Christmas morning. Except on Oak Island, the excitement isn't only about opening the presents. It's about everything that happens before you finally get to them. The drilling, the waiting, the testing, the clues, and the growing belief that something could actually be buried beneath the ground. If following an investigation this close to a potential breakthrough is your kind of story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Every borehole, core sample, and laboratory result is being followed as the investigation unfolds, so you don't miss the next major discovery from Oak Island. But while the money pit drilling operation continues, another investigation is taking place farther east, and this one leads to the Dunfield spoils. On Lot 18, Rick Lagina joins heavy equipment operator Billy Gerhardt, metal detection specialist Gary Drayton, and Jack Begley as they begin examining enormous piles of earth known as the Dunfield spoils. Those piles have a history of their own. In 1965, searcher Robert Dunfield launched one of the most aggressive excavations ever attempted on Oak Island. Using heavy equipment, he carved out an enormous excavation, approximately 100 feet wide and 140 feet deep, in an attempt to reach the legendary Money Pit treasure vault. The operation ultimately failed, and when Dunfield abandoned the project, massive quantities of excavated soil were left behind. The piles remained. But there was a major problem. Dunfield never systematically searched through the material he had removed. He didn't have today's specialists, modern metal detectors, laboratory testing, or the ability to examine every unusual fragment recovered from the soil. Nearly 60 years later, that forgotten material has become a new hunting ground. For Rick, that's exactly what makes it worth investigating. If Dunfield unknowingly excavated important evidence and simply left it sitting in the spoils, the clues could still be waiting there. The search begins. Billy starts peeling away the layers with heavy equipment. Then the ground begins revealing something unexpected. Wood. First, individual pieces appear, then more. Soon, the crew notices what looks like continuous seams of wood running through a particular section of the material. Gary brings in his metal detector and begins sweeping the exposed ground. Almost immediately, the detector responds. Iron signals are appearing throughout the layer, and one particular signal stands out. Gary narrows it down until the detector indicates a heavy target beneath the surface. He begins digging. When the object finally starts coming free, its weight immediately gets his attention. Gary has a simple observation about Oak Island.